I had asked you about the crime in Utah. I want to throw something up on screen for a sec that I think you'll find very interesting, a tweet from my good friend Mark Rondazza. I liked that there was this zany state that was all Mormon and moral as shit and wasn't full of drunks and pirates like myself. I'm bummed that Utah is monoculturing into a degenerate shithole.
Thank you.
I want Utah wagging its finger at us, just like I want Florida mooning Utah.
As do I. And that's the thing, Ron. We need some semblance of normalcy. We need some semblance of what is good to look forward to. When you're at the bottom, you're looking up and you're going, okay, as I gain more wealth, as I gain more opportunities, I know that people are still going to hate me because I'm white, or they're going to assume things about me because of my gender. Regardless of what it is, you're not going to be empowered to step forward and to try. And that is what I was seeing happening here in Salt Lake County. You asked me what makes me qualified. Being DA does not mean that you are the key prosecutor. You're not going to be going in there like Fannie Willis, friggin' hopped up on speed and showing up and arguing cases and putting the bad guys away. That's not what you do. What you do is you go to the legislature and you beg for money and you make sure that that money is properly put where it should be, making sure that the office is running correctly, making sure that your prosecutors have everything that they need to be successful, making sure that the policies make sense and that they're in line with what the law requires, making sure that they are actually enforcing the law fairly. Are they litigating well? Do they have the training that they need? Are they working well with the police? Are the police doing their job? Do we need to investigate over there? There was a huge failure on the part of RDA in terms of the civil side. There was failures all across the board, but the guy is notoriously short-staffed all the time because he's an a-hole. He's difficult to work with. No one likes him. And I'm one of those people where, for better or for worse, I'm going to tell you what I'm thinking, especially when you have a DA whose policies that he was sending down to his prosecutors included one that said, you should not bring nor maintain charges against a defendant who you believe is innocent, regardless of the evidence presented. Ron, what legal standard is that?
In other words, believe is innocent is a subjective standard. Here's the file. Fingerprints, video, affidavits, officer's report,
confessions,
blood work, confession. He doesn't feel guilty to me. Let me play devil's advocate, because if there's one thing America has learned is the extent of prosecutorial misconduct, ethical lapses for which they are never, ever held accountable. So I asked my prosecutor friends who I would meet in private practice, or in other words, ex-prosecutor friends, what would you do if the guy's innocent? And I'll get all kinds of different answers. What we've mostly learned, but these Southern District of New York scumbags, and these Washington, D.C. scumbags, and this Jack Smith, this is one thing I just could never get my arms around. I understand being incredibly ruthless in your career. I understand that I'm utterly incapable of it, but I understand that. But to send people to prison for years or decades so you can have another notch on your barrel, we see that people do it. So if you told me, well, there's a prosecutor in Salt Lake County, Utah, who said, you've got to look within your soul and say to yourself, not the red weld here. I can put this guy away, but this doesn't smell right to me. I don't think there's a case. That might sound to me like a pretty enlightened point of view.
It could be if it were an objective standard. If all the evidence, though, is pointing to someone being guilty, being a prosecutor is not, you're not Superman, okay? Newsflash, prosecutors are not God. They're not Superman. They're not omnipotent. They're not omniscient. They can't read into a defendant's soul and say, I know that person is not guilty. What you do is you rely on the evidence that's given to you by your fact finders. And what I came to understand about this policy is that what it really was a deep mistrust and distrust of the police. They did not want to work with the fact finders, because if you trust your fact finders and you trust that you're getting evidence, then you follow the evidence. And if the evidence leads to a conviction, it leads to a conviction. If the evidence leads to an acquittal, it leads to an acquittal. If it means that you don't meet that probable cause standard, then you drop it. If it means you meet the probable cause standard, but there are mitigating circumstances that you become aware of and you decide, hey, you know what, let's try and work out a plea deal, and that's one thing. But to outright send over 200 denial letters, copy and paste for every single case, that to me speaks to what his real policies were, which fundamentally was de-prosecution. And I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but it's this concept of leveling the playing field, creating equity in law by deciding just not to prosecute. And that's exactly what has happened here in Salt Lake County. And you're seeing the result of it is these low-level offenders. And I say low-level because everybody says there's high-level offenders. That's bullshit. What that is it's coming from the perspective of someone who's never been poor. It's coming from the perspective of, oh, well, an assault on a homeless person, that happens all the time. We don't really need to throw the book at this homeless guy who beat up this other homeless guy to steal his stuff, because it's not going to fix the underlying problem. We're not in the business of fixing problems, Ron, through our legal system. It is not well equipped to do that. We're there to enforce the law fairly. Now, if justice calls for something else and you can articulate why you're not prosecuting, then you need to make that argument to the people who you serve. It's not fun to be the state. It should be is a necessary evil.
Hit the nail on the head there, Danny, because what we have seen come into its really horrific highest zenithness is this cadre of people who believe that they are absolutely entitled to rule. Yep. And that everyone else is. I want to thank Torrin 3 for the $5 super chat, the first transcontinental Law Stream super chat. She is listening. He is, Torrin. He's listening and braiding. It is really true that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, if you handle it the right way.
And that's where personal choice and accountability comes into play. There are certain choices that a defendant makes in their life that is either going to land them in jail or give them the freedom and opportunities that they need to succeed. If you want to save America, don't do it in the prosecutor's office. You're not going to do it there. Where you do it is in the lawmaking office, not the enforcement side, the lawmaking side. And this is what I told constituents all the time, because, well, how could you enforce, marijuana laws, for example, against people if that's something you believe should be legal? And I said, well, you do it, and then the legislature realizes how stupid it is, and your job as DA is to communicate that to the legislature and change the law. If you're not showing them the actual case studies, generally speaking, they are privileged. They do have charmed lives.
This really does, though, get us to one of my favorite topics, and you really hit it, Danny, which is that there's this phenomenon that has been accepted by the political elite in our country, which is that prosecutors have been given this veto power over law. They've taken this admittedly esoteric concept of prosecutorial discretion and turned it into a fiat. The idea of prosecutorial discretion is, I'm going to be the human being. Like you said, you have responsibility to the defendant as well, and to ethics and to the people. And it's a tough call, but I have been appointed or elected to this position, and I'm going to take the responsibility of not proceeding with this prosecution. It's not the right thing to do. They took that and said, it's okay for a prosecutor to announce, either while running for office or after election, here are the laws that have been passed by the legislature and signed by the chief executive, the governor, that I have decided are not going to be crimes anymore.
Yep.
That's so freaking insane. That is such a gigantic collapse of the rule of law. It's mind-boggling. They ran on it and they were elected.
It creates a Stalinistic, find me the man, I'll show you the crime. That's exactly what it is. Think about it this way. You are elected to office, okay? Let's say that there's this MS-13 boss out there. and he's money laundering through, let's say, a trucking company. Okay. And a trucking company gives you a very large donation for your campaign. And they make it very well known to you that that's their business and that they hope that you'll be a great DA and ensure that there's no disruption of their business. Now, as your DA, you come to find out that there's some involvement between this trucking company and MS-13. So you go and put away one of the MS-13 gang members, right? One of the ones who are not quite top tier, but middle of the road, middle management MS-13 guy. He's, trafficking women, trafficking drugs, etc. You catch that guy, you're prosecuting him, and then suddenly you get a phone call from one of your constituents, and they say, DA, I thought you said you were going to be fair and equitable in your prosecution. All right? Either you let my guy go, or we're going to make this a racial issue, you name it. We're going to call up the ACLU, and we're going to come protest outside your building until you concede. And so what do you do as DA? Why are you so interested in this? To call up your police friends and have them immediately go in and start investigating, the boss guy. But if you're a corrupt DA and you understand that you want to stay in office, you don't do that. You let your MS-13 guy go, or you get a mark on your head, and you'd much rather just let it go and get a little payout on the side for your next election cycle. And this is what propels a lot of corrupt DAs to continue in their cycles. And then they let it go. And then more and more good people who didn't do, some guy, who knows, maybe his parents died and he lost his wife and someone shot his dog. He decides, F it, I'm just going to run right through this bank because they said I needed my ID and my ID got stolen, and they just hit the side of the bank. Next thing you know, they're in jail for the next 10 years. And it's like they're getting the book thrown at them, and the whole community is going, what the hell is happening to our community? And they don't understand why. Well, you need to prosecute someone.